December. Wind screamed through Kiernan's broken shutters, carrying the stench of rot and cheap whiskey. Snow piled knee-high against the door. Inside, the stove was cold, the cupboard bare, and the only sound was a man's drunken muttering and the scrape of a chair dragged across dirt floor. Silas Cordell knocked once. The door cracked open. James Kiernan swayed in the frame, eyes bloodshot, grin mean. "You want your money?" he slurred. "Take her." He shoved Rose forward, barefoot, silent, a faded shawl clutched tight. 8 months' wages or she's Finch's whore by spring. Your choice. Rose's eyes met Silas's. No tears, just a question. He saw the bruise purpling her cheekbone. Behind him, 2 loggers shifted, uncomfortable witnesses. Silas's hand extended, rough palm open. Rose stared at it, the first choice she'd been offered in years. "Come with me," Silas said. Rose's hand moved. Kiernan lunged. Silas's arm shot out, blocking Kiernan's drunken lunge. The older man stumbled, cursing, boots scraping frozen mud. Rose flinched backward, shawl slipping from her shoulders. "Easy now," Silas said, voice low. "Not a threat, a boundary." Kiernan spat at Silas's boots. "She ain't worth half that." Rose's breath caught. Her hands trembled against the doorframe. Silas didn't look at her. He reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch, and counted silver coins onto the porch rail. 1, 2, 3. Slow, deliberate. The clink of metal against wood louder than Kiernan's muttering. 8 months' wages, Silas said. "That's what we agreed." "Agreed?" Kiernan laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "I'm being generous. That girl's eaten my food for 22 years and given me nothing but shame." Behind Silas, Logger Pete cleared his throat. "Boss, we should—" "Wait," Silas said. He set the last coin down. 12 in all, more than Kiernan deserved. More than any man should pay for another human being. But Silas had seen the bruise. And the way Rose stood, spine straight despite everything, like a tree that refused to fall even when the wind howled. "She comes with me," Silas said. "Debt's paid. You don't follow. You don't speak her name. You don't darken my camp." Kiernan's grin faded. He looked at the coins, then at Rose, then back at Silas. Something mean flickered in his eyes, but it died quick. He scooped up the silver, shoved it in his pocket, and turned away. "Good riddance," he muttered, slamming the door. The sound echoed across the snow. Rose stood frozen, one hand still clutching the shawl. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. Silas stepped aside, gestured toward the wagon. "You're safe now." She didn't move. Pete shuffled forward, hat in hand. "Miss, it's colder than a widow's heart out here. We got blankets in the wagon." Rose looked at Pete, then at Silas. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. "Why did you take me?" Silas met her gaze. He could have lied. Could have said it was charity, or duty, or just business, but he didn't. "Wasn't safe to leave you." Rose's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She nodded once, stepped off the porch, and walked toward the wagon. As she passed, Silas noticed something in the snow by the threshold. A robin, dead. Frozen mid-flight, wings spread, beak open in a silent cry. He looked away. Rose sat rigid in this wagon bed, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of pine and smoke. Snow fell in fat, lazy flakes, dusting her hair, her shoulders, the rough planks beneath her. She didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going or what he expected of her, just stared at the trees sliding past, dark and silent as sentries. Up front, Pete drove the team while Boyd, younger, cocky, always looking for trouble, rode alongside on his roan mare. Every few minutes, Boyd would glance back at Rose, smirk, then spur his horse ahead. "Finch ain't gonna like this," Pete muttered. Silas, sitting beside him, didn't respond. "I'm serious, boss. Word is he had plans for the Kiernan girl. Sent his clerk sniffing around last week, asking if she was spoken for. She wasn't. And now?" Silas's jaw tightened. "Now she's under my roof. Finch can choke on his plans." Pete snorted. "You always had a way with diplomacy." Behind them, Rose shifted. Silas heard the blanket rustle, the creak of wood as she adjusted her weight. He resisted the urge to look back. The wagon rolled on. After a long silence, Rose's voice cut through the cold. "Why did you take me?" Silas didn't answer. Couldn't. Not with Pete listening, not with Boyd circling like a buzzard. Pete filled the silence instead. "Boss has got 2 boys, lost their mama 3 years back. Reckon he could use help around the place." Rose said nothing. The trees thinned. Ahead, through the falling snow, warm lights flickered. Lanterns strung between cabins, smoke rising from chimneys, the low hum of men finishing the day's work. Cordell's logging camp, Silas's camp, And now, for better or worse, hers. As the wagon pulled into the clearing, Rose caught sight of the main cabin. Two small faces pressed against a frosted window, breath fogging the glass. Boys, watching, waiting. Rose's chest tightened. She pulled the blanket closer, fingers digging into the wool. "Those your sons?" she asked. Silas nodded. "They know about me?" "Not yet." The wagon stopped. Pete set the brake. Boyd dismounted, smirking as he tipped his hat to Rose. "Welcome to paradise, miss." Rose ignored him. She climbed down, boots crunching in fresh snow, and looked up at the cabin. The boys were gone from the window now, but she could feel them, small, curious, afraid. Just like her, Silas stepped beside her, close enough that she could smell leather and sawdust and something warmer. Safety, maybe, or the promise of it. "Ready?" he asked. Rose didn't know, but she nodded anyway. The cabin door creaked open. The kitchen smelled of burnt porridge and desperation. Rose stood at the cast iron stove, stirring oats that had already scorched to the bottom of the pot. Behind her, two boys sat at the rough-hewn table, silent as stones. The older one, maybe 8, watched her with dark, suspicious eyes. The younger one, no more than 5, clutched a wooden horse so tight his knuckles had gone white. "Sam, Ethan," Silas's voice came from the doorway. "This is Rose. She'll be helping around the place." Neither boy spoke. Rose turned, wiped her hands on her apron, one of the late wife's, Silas had said, hanging on a peg like a ghost, and forced a small smile. "Morning," she said softly. Sam, the older boy, looked at his father. "Where's she sleeping?" "The spare room, off the kitchen." "That's Mama's sewing room." Silas's jaw worked. "Was." Ethan buried his face in his father's leg. Silas rested a hand on the boy's head, fingers gentle despite their roughness. Rose turned back to the stove. Her throat felt tight. She ladled porridge into bowls, set them on the table, and stepped back. "Eat," Silas said. The boys didn't move. Rose retreated to the corner, hands folded, eyes on the floor. She could feel their stares like brands. The door banged open. Cold air rushed in, along with Boyd grinning like he'd just won a hand of cards. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes raking over Rose. "Morning, miss. Sleep well?" Rose didn't answer. Boyd's grin widened. "Boss finally got himself a woman. Took long enough." Silas's spoon clattered into his bowl. "She's not—" Rose touched his arm. Light, quick. "It's fine." It wasn't. Boyd laughed, slapped the doorframe, and headed toward the timber yard, still chuckling. Sam pushed his bowl away. "I'm not hungry." "Eat," Silas said again, but the boy was already out of his chair, dragging Ethan with him. The door slammed. Rose exhaled slowly. "I can go." "No. They don't want me here." Silas stood, crossed to the stove, and poured himself coffee from the battered pot. He took a long drink, then set the cup down hard. "They're hurting. Doesn't mean you leave." Rose met his eyes. "And you? What about me? Are you hurting?" Silas didn't answer. He grabbed his coat, shrugged it on, and walked to the door. "I've got timber to cut. There's mending in the basket if you need something to do." He left. Rose stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of burnt porridge and the weight of things unsaid. Outside, Boyd's laughter echoed across the snow. The mill office sat at the edge of town, squat and ugly, built from timber Finch had stolen from better men. Inside, it smelled of ink and sawdust and something oily, greed, maybe, or just the residue of too many dirty deals. Silas stood across from Finch's desk, hat in hand, trying to keep his fists from clenching. Finch smiled, always smiling, that one. Teeth too white, eyes too cold. "Cordell," Finch said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Heard you took in the Kiernan girl. Her father's debt is paid." "Is it?" Finch opened a drawer, pulled out a sheaf of papers, and slid them across the desk. "Funny. I've got a document here says otherwise." Silas picked up the papers, read the first line, then the second. His blood went cold. "Guardianship agreement. James Kiernan, father and legal guardian of Rose Kiernan, hereby transfers custodial rights to Magnus Finch, Esquire, in exchange for settlement of debts owed." The signature at the bottom was Kiernan's, sloppy, drunk, but legal. "That's not possible," Silas said. "It's very possible. Signed 2 weeks ago, notarized by the clerk in Butte. Check the seal if you doubt me." Silas checked. The seal was real. Finch's smile widened. "She's mine, Cordell. By law. Has been since before you ever knocked on Kiernan's door. He took my silver. And I'll reimburse you, generously, but the girl comes back to me." Silas's fist crumpled the papers. "She's not property." "Oh, but she is. Until she's 18, anyway. And according to the birth record, Finch tapped another document on his desk, she won't be 18 for another 4 months, April 15th to be exact, same day as the spring court session. What do you want with her? Finch's smile faded. His eyes went flat. That's not your concern. It is if she's under my roof. Then I suggest you remove her from your roof. Finch stood, buttoned his coat. You've got timber contracts coming up for renewal, permits to file. I'd hate for any complications to arise. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Silas leaned forward, palms flat on the desk. You touch her, I'll bury you. Finch didn't flinch. Law says different. Clock's ticking, Cordell. You've got until April to decide what matters more, your pride or your livelihood. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back. Oh, and one more thing. That homestead her mother left? The one Kiernan never told her about? Finch's smile returned. It's sitting on the richest timberland in the territory, worth 10 of your camps, maybe 20. He tipped his hat. She's mine by law. But if you want to keep pretending otherwise, be my guest. Just know that come spring, I'll take what's owed, one way or another. The door closed. Silas stood alone in the office, papers crumpled in his fist, the weight of Finch's words pressing down like an avalanche. Outside, a raven cawed. The sound felt like a warning. The church smelled of beeswax and old stone, cold and quiet as a tomb. Rose knelt in the confessional booth, hands folded tight, breath visible in the December chill. Through the latticed screen, she could make out Father Dominic's profile. Gray hair, bent shoulders, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Bless me, Father," she whispered. "How long since your last confession, child?" 2 years, maybe 3. A pause, then gently, "Go on." Rose swallowed. "I don't know if this is a sin, but I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of being sent back, of being traded again." The priest shifted. Wood creaked beneath his weight. "You're with Silas Cordell now?" "Yes, Father." "He's a good man." "I know, but the law—" Her voice broke. She pressed a fist to her mouth, steadied herself. "There's a man, Magnus Finch. He says my father signed papers, says I belong to him until April." Silence stretched long enough that Rose wondered if the priest had heard her. Then softly, "Your mother, did she sing to you?" Rose blinked. "What?" "When you were small, did she sing?" Yes, an old song. Irish, I think. I don't remember all the words. Just, she hummed a few bars, hesitant, the melody fragile as frost. Through the screen, Father Dominic's breath hitched. "Suo gone," he whispered. "My sister used to sing that." Rose's hand stilled. "Your sister?" "She died a long time ago, before you were born." His voice thickened. "Or so I thought." "Father, I don't understand." "Child, there's something you need to know, but not yet, not here." He leaned closer to the screen. "Come back in 3 days, alone. I'll have answers." "What kind of answers?" "The kind that might set you free." Rose's heart hammered. "From Finch?" "From everyone who's ever tried to claim you." The confessional went silent, except for the distant drip of melting snow from the eaves. Rose pressed her palm to the screen. "Will you help me?" Father Dominic's hand appeared on the other side, not quite touching hers, separated by wood and wire and 22 years of silence. "I failed your mother," he said. "I won't fail you." Rose pulled back, rose to her feet, and stepped out of the booth. The church felt larger now, colder, full of shadows and secrets. Behind her, Father Dominic remained kneeling. She could hear him praying. Dawn came gray and cold, the sky bruised with clouds. In the clearing behind the mess hall, a dozen loggers gathered in a loose circle, axes planted in the snow like grave markers. The air smelled of wet pine and coffee, and every man's breath rose white in the freezing air. Silas stood at the center, whetstone in hand. This was ritual, older than the camp, older than most of the men standing there. Every logger sharpened his own blade. Every man did it in silence. It was a test of patience, of craft, of respect for the work that kept them alive. Boyd stood off to the side, smirking. "We starting or waiting for the lady?" Pete shot him a look. "Shut it." Rose appeared at the edge of the circle, hesitant, hands buried in her shawl. She'd watched from the kitchen window for 3 mornings now, wondering what the men were doing, why they stood so still, why even the loudest among them went quiet when the stones came out. Silas saw her, nodded once. Come here. She crossed the snow slowly, aware of every eye on her. Boyd's smirk widened. Two of the younger loggers exchanged glances. Silas held out the whetstone. You know how to sharpen a blade? No. Then it's time you learned. He handed her his axe, heavy, well-balanced, the handle worn smooth by years of use. Rose took it, nearly dropped it, caught it with both hands. Silas knelt, set the whetstone on a flat stump, and gestured for her to kneel beside him. Angle's everything, he said. Too steep, you weaken the edge. Too shallow, it won't cut. 15 degrees, feel it. He guided her hands, positioned the blade against the stone, and pulled it slow and steady. Sparks flew, tiny, brief, bright as stars. Rose watched, mesmerized. Again, Silas said. She pulled. Sparks. Good. Around them, the loggers began their own sharpening. The sound rose like a song, steel on stone, rhythmic, hypnotic, the kind of music men made when words weren't enough. Rose worked the blade, her strokes growing steadier, more confident. Her hands ached from the cold, but she didn't stop. Beside her, Silas watched. Not the blade, her. Pete grinned, nudged the man next to him. She's a natural. Boyd muttered something under his breath and turned away. After 10 minutes, Rose held up the axe. The edge gleamed, sharp as a promise. Silas tested it with his thumb, nodded. You're a natural. Their hands lingered on the handle, fingers almost touching. Thank you, Rose whispered. For what? For not treating me like... She stopped, couldn't finish. Silas understood anyway. Across the yard, Boyd slammed a door. The sound echoed through the camp, sharp and petty. Pete chuckled. He's scared of her. One of the other loggers laughed, then another. Rose looked around the circle, at the men who'd watched her with suspicion just days ago, who now nodded in quiet approval, who'd made space for her in their ritual without being asked. She felt something unfamiliar unfold in her chest. Belonging, maybe? Or the beginning of it? Silas stood, offered his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. The axe hung between them, still gleaming. Keep it sharp, Silas said. Rose nodded. She would. The general store sat on Main Street, squat and drafty, shelves stocked with flour, salt, tobacco, and gossip. Rose stood at the counter, waiting while the clerk, a narrow-faced man named Hopper, weighed out sugar with hands that shook slightly. Behind her, 3 townswomen whispered near the fabric bolts. Rose caught fragments. Cordell's woman. Kiernan's girl. Wonder what he's paying her. She kept her eyes down, fingers curled around the list Silas had given her. Beans, coffee, lamp oil. Simple things. Hopper set the sugar on the counter, didn't meet her eyes. That'll be $2. Rose counted out the coins. Hopper swept them into his palm, then hesitated. Miss Kiernan? She looked up. Mr. Finch asked me to give you a message. Hopper's voice dropped. He says you're spoken for. Guardianship papers signed legal. You're to report to his office by week's end, or he'll come collect you himself. The store went silent. Rose's hands went cold. Ain't my business, Hopper said quickly. Just delivering the message. One of the townswomen stepped closer, eyes bright with curiosity. Is it true your father sold you twice? Rose's throat closed. The door banged open. Cold air rushed in, and with it Silas. He crossed the store in 4 strides, stepped between Rose and the women, and stared at Hopper. What did you say to her? Hopper paled. Just, Mr. Finch asked me to. I don't care what Finch asked. The townswomen backed toward the door, skirts rustling. Silas turned to Rose. You done here? She nodded, mute. He picked up the sack of supplies, took her elbow gently, and guided her toward the door. Behind them, Hopper called out, Mr. Cordell, sir. Mr. Finch said if you interfere, there'll be consequences. Silas stopped, didn't turn around. Tell Finch I'll be waiting. He pushed open the door. Rose stumbled after him, into the cold, into the stares of a dozen townspeople who'd gathered on the boardwalk to watch. She'd never felt more exposed. Halfway down the street, she heard footsteps behind them. She turned, and there was Father Dominic, black coat flapping, face flushed from hurrying. Silas, wait. They stopped. Dominic caught his breath, glanced at Rose, then at Silas. Finch's papers. Let me see them. At the camp. Then I'm coming with you. Dominic's eyes were fierce. If Finch is hiding something, I'll find it. I have access to records he doesn't. Rose looked between them. What records? Dominic met her gaze. Something sad and ancient in his eyes. Baptismal, birth, death? The church keeps what the law forgets. Silas nodded once. Come on, then. They walked together through the snow, past the staring faces, past the whispers that followed like wolves. Rose pulled her shawl tighter. Behind them, in the general store window, Hopper watched. And in the mill office across the street, Magnus Finch smiled. The sound of hoofbeats pulled Rose from the kitchen where she'd been kneading bread, hands dusted with flour. She wiped them on her apron, moved to the window, and felt her stomach drop. 6 riders, Finch at the front, flanked by his foreman and 4 hired men. They stopped in the clearing, horses stamping, breath clouding the air. Silas was already outside, Pete and 3 other loggers moving to stand behind him. Sam and Ethan appeared in the cabin doorway, phased pale. Rose stepped onto the porch. Finch dismounted, unhurried, pulling a rolled document from his saddlebag. He smiled when he saw Rose. "Miss Kiernan, good to see you." She didn't respond. Finch turned to Silas. "I've been patient, Cordell. More than generous, really. But patience has its limits." He unrolled the document, held it up. Even from the porch, Rose could see the territorial seal, the official letterhead. "Notice of permit revocation," Finch read aloud. "Due to failure to comply with guardianship ordinances, timber cutting rights for Silas Cordell are hereby suspended, pending resolution of custody dispute." Pete swore. One of the loggers stepped forward, fists clenched, but Silas raised a hand. "How long?" Silas asked, voice flat. "Until you return what's mine." Finch's smile widened. "No permits means no contracts. No contracts means no income. How long can you feed your men without income, Cordell? 2 weeks? 3? Sam clutched Ethan's hand. The younger boy started to cry. Rose felt something crack open inside her chest. She stepped off the porch, boots crunching in snow, and walked toward Finch. "Stop." Finch turned, eyebrows raised. "Miss Kiernan, finally ready to be reasonable?" "What do you want with me?" "Want?" Finch laughed. "I want what's legally mine. A ward to oversee, property to manage." "Property?" "The homestead your mother left. 50 acres of prime timberland along the Bitterroot, worth a fortune." His eyes glittered. "Didn't Kiernan tell you?" Rose's vision blurred. "My mother's dead." "Yes, and her land isn't. Under territorial law, it passes to her daughter, you, on your 18th birthday, April 15th. He stepped closer. "No. But until then, your legal guardian controls it. That would be me. My father signed his rights away, for a price." Finch's voice dropped. "He got $200 and a bottle of whiskey. I got you and everything you're worth." Rose's hands shook. "I didn't know about any land." "Of course you didn't. Kiernan kept you ignorant on purpose, easier to control." Finch glanced at Silas. "Just like Cordell here, keeping you close, making you useful. You think he took you out of kindness?" "That's enough," Silas said. But Finch wasn't finished. "Men don't rescue women for free, Miss Kiernan. They rescue them because they want something. Cordell wants your land, same as me. Only difference is I'm honest about it." Rose looked at Silas. His face was stone, but she saw the flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Is it true?" she whispered. Silas's jaw worked. "I didn't know about the land, not when I took you. But you know now?" He didn't answer. Finch mounted his horse, rolled the document, and tucked it away. "You've got until week's end, Cordell. Return her or I'll shut you down permanently. And Miss Kiernan," he tipped his hat. "One way or another, come April, you're mine. Law says so. Judge'll say so. Best make peace with it now." He spurred his horse. The riders followed, kicking up snow, leaving deep tracks across the clearing. Sam ran to his father, buried his face in Silas's coat. Ethan stood frozen on the porch, tears streaming. Pete cursed, kicked a bucket, sent it clattering. Rose stood alone in the center of the clearing, flour still dusting her hands, the weight of 50 acres pressing down like a sentence. She looked at Silas. He looked back. And for the first time since she'd taken his hand in the snow, she wondered if Finch was right. The fever came fast. Sam had been coughing for 2 days, wet, rattling coughs that shook his small frame and left him gasping. By nightfall, his skin burned hot enough that Rose could feel it from across the room. Silas paced the kitchen, helpless. "I'll ride for the doctor." "Roads are snowed in," Pete said from the doorway. "Won't make it back before morning, if then." Rose knelt beside Sam's cot, pressed her palm to his forehead. Too hot. She'd seen this before, in her mother, in neighbors, in children who didn't survive the winter. Willow bark, she said quietly. Silas stopped pacing. What? For the fever. Do you have any? Maybe. The storage shed? Get it, in clean water, boiling. Silas stared at her for a heartbeat, then nodded and disappeared into the cold. Rose turned to Sam, smoothed the damp hair from his forehead. You're going to be all right. The boy's eyes fluttered. Mama? Rose's throat tightened. No, sweetheart. It's Rose. Where's Mama? Rose swallowed. She's resting, but I'm here. Sam's hand found hers, small and hot and trembling. He held on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. Ethan appeared in the doorway, clutching his wooden horse, eyes wide. Is Sammy dying? No, Rose said firmly. He's not. Silas returned with the bark and a kettle of boiling water. Rose worked quickly, stripping the bark, steeping it, cooling it just enough that Sam could drink without burning his mouth. She held the cup to his lips, coaxed him to swallow, and hummed while he choked it down. The same lullaby from the confessional. The one her mother had sung. The one Father Dominic's sister had known. Suo gone. Sam's breathing eased. Not much, but enough. Rose sat back on her heels, exhausted. Her dress clung to her back, damp with sweat despite the cold. She felt Silas watching her, felt the weight of his gaze like a hand on her shoulder. You should rest, he said. So should you. I can't. She looked up at him. In the lamplight, his face was all hard lines and shadows, jaw tight, eyes red-rimmed from worry and sleeplessness. You think I'm using you, she said quietly. Silas flinched. I don't. For the land. For safety. You think I'm just another burden you have to carry. No. Then why won't you look at me? He did then, looked at her fully, and she saw something raw in his eyes, something that had nothing to do with land or law or Finch's threats. Because, he said, voice rough, if I look at you too long, I forget why I shouldn't. Rose's breath caught. Shouldn't what? Silas turned away, gripped the edge of the table. You're here because I made a choice. Not because of land, not because of what you can give me. Because leaving you in that shack felt like leaving part of my soul to freeze. Silence stretched between them, broken only by Sam's labored breathing and the crackle of the fire. Rose stood slowly, crossed to where Silas stood, and touched his arm. I'm here, she said, echoing her earlier words to Sam. Not because I have to be, because I choose to be. Silas's hand covered hers, rough, warm, steady. Even if Finch wins? Even then. Behind them, Ethan whispered, Is Sammy going to be okay? Rose turned, smiled. If we tend him, if we don't give up. The boy nodded, climbed onto the cot beside his brother, and curled against him like a pup seeking warmth. Silas watched them, something breaking and rebuilding in his chest. You're good with them, he said. They're easy to love. And their father? Rose met his eyes. Harder, but not impossible. The ghost of a smile touched Silas's mouth, first one she'd seen since Finch rode into camp. Get some rest, he said. I'll watch him. We'll both watch him. So they did, sat on opposite sides of the small cot, tending a feverish boy while the snow fell outside and the night pressed close. And sometime near dawn, when Sam's fever finally broke and his breathing steadied into sleep, Silas reached across the blanket. Rose took his hand. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Outside, the first gray light touched the pines. In the rafters above, something shifted, a flutter of wings, a soft chirp. Rose looked up, a robin, small, bright-eyed, perched on the beam above the stove, alive, not like the frozen one at Kiernan's threshold, not dead, not silent, alive. The bird tilted its head, sang once, a clear, piercing note, and disappeared through a crack in the eaves. Rose squeezed Silas's hand. He squeezed back. Morning came cold and clear. Rose woke to find Silas already gone, the cabin quiet except for the boy's soft breathing. She dressed quickly, pulled on her shawl, and stepped outside. Voices drifted from the mess hall. She followed the sound, pushed open the door, and found Silas, Pete, and Father Dominic bent over a table covered in papers. Contracts, permits, and something older, yellowed with age. Church ledgers. Dominic looked up, gestured her forward. Rose, good. You need to see this. She crossed the room, boots echoing on the plank floor. The men stepped aside, making space. On the table, beneath Dominic's weathered hand, lay a document sealed with red wax. The seal was cracked now, broken carefully, the edges still sharp. "What is it?" Rose asked. Dominic's voice was soft. "Your birth record, the real one." Rose's pulse hammered. "I don't understand." "Your mother," Dominic swallowed hard. "Her name was Catherine. Catherine Brennan. She was my sister." Oh, the room tilted. Rose gripped the table edge. "Your sister?" "She got pregnant young, unwed. Our father," Dominic's voice cracked. "He cast her out, told the parish she'd died of fever. I was in seminary, couldn't help her, couldn't—" He stopped, composed himself. "She gave birth in secret. A midwife named Clara Tate attended, and then Catherine married Kiernan to give you a name, but you're not his blood." Rose stared at the document, at the careful script, at her mother's name, written in ink that had survived 22 years. "Then whose—" "Mine," Dominic said. "By lineage. You're my niece, Rose. And that land your mother left? It was her dowry. Her inheritance from our father. She meant it for you." Silas leaned forward. "If Kiernan's not her father by blood, he had no legal right to sign guardianship papers." Dominic nodded. "And neither does Finch." Pete grinned. Which means, Dominic said, "we take this to the territorial court. April 15th. We prove Finch's claim is fraud." Rose's hands trembled. "Will it work?" "Judge Hayes is hearing the case. He and I studied at seminary together. He's a good man. If we bring proof, this record, Clara's testimony, he'll listen." "And if he doesn't?" Silence fell. Silas moved beside Rose, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. "Then we fight anyway." She looked at him. "You'd risk everything? For me?" "Already did. Night I knocked on your father's door." Rose's eyes burned. She turned back to the table, to the baptismal record, to the proof that she'd never belonged to Kiernan or Finch or anyone but herself. "Then we fight," she said. Dominic folded the document carefully, slipped it into his coat. "Clara Tate still lives in town. I'll speak with her. If she'll testify—" "She will," Rose said. "She has to." "Finch owns her husband's gambling debt," Pete warned. "Might not be that simple." Silas's jaw set. "I'll buy the debt. Name the price." Pete whistled low. "That's not small money, boss." "I don't care." Rose touched Silas's arm. "You can't. I can. And I will." He met her eyes. "This isn't about land, Rose. It's about what's right." Dominic closed the ledger, clasped Silas's shoulder. "Then it's settled. We gather our proof, we present it to Hayes, and we pray." "Amen," Pete muttered. Rose looked around the table, at these men who barely knew her, who had no reason to stand beside her except that they'd chosen to. Chosen, not bought, not coerced, chosen. "Thank you," she whispered. Silas's hand found hers beneath the table. "No need." Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the frost on the pines. Spring was still months away, but it was coming. The church basement smelled of damp stone and forgotten things. Rose followed Father Dominic down the narrow stairs, one hand trailing along the cold wall, the other clutching her shawl. A single lamp threw shadows that danced like spirits. "Careful," Dominic said, his voice echoing. "Steps are slick." They reached the bottom. Shelves lined the walls, ledgers stacked floor to ceiling, leather spines cracked with age, some dating back 40 years or more. Baptisms, marriages, deaths, the hidden history of a frontier town recorded in fading ink. Dominic moved to the far corner, ran his finger along the spines until he found what he sought. He pulled down a heavy volume marked 1855, set it on a dusty table, and opened it carefully. Pages rustled. Rose caught glimpses of names, dates, sacraments performed in vanished chapels by priests long dead. Dominic stopped at a page near the middle. His finger traced a line, then paused. "Here." Rose leaned closer. Rose Catherine Brennan. Born March 4th, 1855, mother. Catherine Mary Brennan, unwed. Midwife, Clara Tate. Father, unknown. Baptized April 2nd, 1855, by Father Aidan Riley. Below, in smaller script, note, child later adopted by James Kiernan upon marriage to Catherine Brennan, June 1855. Name changed to Rose Kiernan. Rose's breath caught. Seeing it written, proof that she'd been someone else before Kiernan claimed her, felt like touching a ghost. Dominic turned the page. Something crinkled. He frowned, lifted the edge of the paper. Tucked behind it, yellowed and thin, was a folded note. He unfolded it carefully. Rose read over his shoulder. Payment received, $50. Birth record for Brennan girl to be sealed and removed from public registry. By order of M. Finch. Clerk J. Hopper, April 1855. The words blurred. Rose gripped the table edge. He bribed them, she whispered. 22 years ago, before I even knew my own name. Dominic's face went pale. Hopper, the same clerk who runs the general store now? Why would Finch pay to hide my birth? Because, Dominic said slowly, if no one knew you were Catherine's daughter, if everyone believed you were Kiernan's by blood, then when Catherine died, Finch could claim guardianship through Kiernan, control you, control the Yand. Rose's stomach turned. He's been planning this since I was born. Not just planning, executing. Dominic closed the ledger. Which means there's more. If he bribed Hopper once, he bribed him again to forge the guardianship papers. Exactly, Rose straightened. Then we need Clara. She was there. She delivered me. She's the only witness who can testify that this record is real. Dominic nodded. I'll find her. But Rose? He hesitated. Finch owns her husband's debt. She might refuse. She won't? How can you be sure? Rose met his eyes. Because she hid this. She touched the bribe note. If she wanted to destroy it, she would have. But she kept it. For 22 years. That's not cowardice, that's hope. Dominic studied her, something fierce and proud flickering in his face. You're more like your mother than I realized. Rose's throat tightened. Tell me about her. Later, when this is finished. He folded the note carefully, tucked it into his coat alongside the baptismal page. First, we find Clara. Then we finish what your mother started. They climbed the stairs together, the lamp casting long shadows behind them. Above, the church bell tolled the hour. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. Clara Tate's house sat at the edge of town, small and sagging, the porch steps rotted through in places. Smoke rose thin and gray from the chimney. Through the window, Rose could see a figure moving, bent, slow, a woman worn down by time and trouble. Silas knocked. The door opened a crack. Clara peered out, eyes cloudy with age, face lined like a map of hard years. Mrs. Tate? Silas said. I'm Silas Cordell. This is Rose Kiernan and Father Dominic. Clara's gaze landed on Rose. She went still. Lord have mercy, she whispered. May we come in? Dominic asked gently. Clara hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. The inside smelled of wood smoke and medicinal herbs, chamomile, yarrow, something bitter Rose couldn't name. A quilt lay half-finished on a chair, needles still threaded. The fire burned low. Clara gestured to the table. Sit. They did. Rose across from Clara, Silas and Dominic flanking her like sentries. Clara's hands shook as she poured water into chipped cups. She set them down, then sank into her chair with a sigh. You look like her, she said to Rose. Your mother, same eyes, same stubborn mouth. Rose's chest tightened. You remember her? Every day of my life, Clara's voice cracked. I delivered you, held you when you took your first breath, and I lied about it for 22 years. Why? Because Finch paid me $50, more money than I'd seen in my life. Clara's eyes filled. My husband gambled. Still does. We were starving. Finch said all I had to do was keep quiet, say the birth never happened, let Kiernan claim you as his own. Rose leaned forward. But you kept the record. Clara nodded. Couldn't destroy it. Tried once, lit the match, held it close, but I couldn't. She touched the quilt on the chair. So I hid it, in the lining, sewed it in myself, told myself someday, when it mattered, I'd bring it out. It matters now, Dominic said. Clara looked at him, then at Rose. Finch will ruin me. He owns my husband's debt, $200. We'll lose the house. Silas pulled a leather pouch from his coat, set it on the table. The coins inside clinked heavily. $250, he said. Enough to pay Finch and have some left. All I ask is you tell the truth. In court, April 15th. Clara stared at the pouch. Her hands trembled worse now, hovering over it like it might bite. He'll come after me, she whispered. He'll try, Silas said, but we'll be standing between you and him. Clara looked at Rose. Child, are you sure? Once I testify, there's no going back. Finch will know, he'll know I lied, he'll know I kept the proof. Rose reached across the table, took Clara's worn hands in hers. "You didn't lie," Rose said softly. "You waited, for the right moment, for someone to care enough to ask." Her voice steadied. "I'm asking now, please. Help me prove I'm not his to take." Clara's eyes spilled over. She pulled one hand free, wiped her face with her apron, then reached beneath her chair. She drew out a small wooden box, lifted the lid, and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. "I made a copy," she said. "The night you were born. Didn't trust the church to keep it safe. Didn't trust anyone but myself." She unfolded it. Rose's breath stopped. It was identical to the baptismal record Dominic had found. Same date, same names, same ink, but this one had something extra, a note at the bottom in Clara's careful hand. "Witnessed by my own eyes and sworn before God, Catherine Brennan gave birth to a daughter this day. The child is not of James Kiernan's blood. Clara Tate, midwife, March 4th, 1855. "I wrote it while you were still covered in birth blood," Clara whispered, "while your mama held you and cried because she knew Kiernan would claim you as his price for marrying her." Dominic took the parchment, held it to the light. "This will stand in court. Hayes can't ignore two identical records from two different sources." Clara nodded slowly. "Then I'll testify. God forgive me for waiting this long." Rose stood, moved around the table, and embraced the old woman. Clara stiffened, then melted, clutching Rose like she was the child she'd delivered all those years ago. "Thank you," Rose whispered. "Your mama would be proud," Clara said. "She fought for you once. Now you're fighting for yourself." They stayed a moment longer, then gathered the documents and stepped back into the cold. Snow fell harder now, covering the tracks they'd made coming in. Silas took Rose's hand as they walked toward the wagon. "You all right?" Rose looked back at Clara's house, at the thin smoke rising, at the woman watching from the window. "I'm stronger than I thought," Rose said. Silas smiled. "I know." Behind them, Father Dominic murmured a prayer. Ahead, the road stretched white and uncertain. But for the first time since Kiernan shoved her into the snow, Rose felt the ground steady beneath her feet. The knock came at dusk, hesitant and uneven. Rose was scrubbing pots in the kitchen, hands raw from lye soap when she heard it. She dried her hands, crossed to the door, and opened it. James Kiernan stood on the porch. He looked worse than she remembered. Thinner, grayer, coat torn at the shoulder. His hands shook and the smell of whiskey hung around him like fog. But his eyes were clear. Sober, maybe, for the first time in years. Rose's breath caught. "What are you doing here?" His voice cracked. "I came to—" He swallowed, looked at his boots. "I'm sorry." Behind Rose, Silas appeared, wiping sawdust from his hands. His jaw tightened when he saw Kiernan. "You need to leave," Silas said. "I know, I will. Just let me say this." Kiernan looked at Rose, eyes wet. "I sold you, twice, like you were cattle, like you were nothing." His voice broke. "You deserved better, you always did. And God help me, I was too weak and too drunk and too ashamed to give it to you." Rose stood frozen. She'd imagined this moment 100 times. What she'd say, how she'd rage, how she'd make him feel the weight of what he'd done. But now, facing him, she felt only emptiness. "Why now?" she asked. "Because Finch came to collect. Said I'd served my purpose. Tossed me $50 and told me to disappear." Kiernan laughed bitterly. $50. That's what I'm worth. Same as you, I guess." Pete appeared at the edge of the clearing, hand on his axe handle, watching. Kiernan took a step forward. Rose stepped back. "Don't," she said. He stopped, nodded. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. He pulled something from his pocket. A tarnished ring. "This was your mother's. Only thing of hers I didn't sell. Figured you should have it." He set it on the porch rail. Rose stared at the ring. She remembered it. Her mother's hands, worn and gentle. The ring always loose on her finger because she'd grown so thin near the end. Kiernan backed down the steps. "I won't come back. I swear it. I just needed you to know." His voice failed. He turned away, stumbled into the snow. Rose watched him go, felt Silas's hand on her shoulder steady and warm. "Rose?" Silas said softly. She stepped off the porch. "Wait." Kiernan stopped, didn't turn around. Rose walked through the snow until she stood a few feet behind him, close enough to see his shoulders shaking, close enough to hear him crying. "I can't forgive you," she said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Kiernan nodded, still not turning. "But Rose's throat closed. She forced the words out. I'll pray for you, that you find whatever it is you're looking for, that you stop running from yourself. Kiernan's shoulders hitched. I don't deserve your prayers. I know, but I'm giving them anyway. She turned and walked back to the cabin. Silas met her at the steps, pulled her close. She pressed her face against his chest, felt his heartbeat, felt the cold seeping through her dress. Behind them, Kiernan stood in the snow for a long moment. Then he walked away, disappearing into the trees. Pete approached, axe still in hand. You think he meant it? Doesn't matter, Silas said. He's gone. Rose pulled back, looked up at Silas. Was I wrong? To let him go? No. Silas touched her cheek. You gave him more grace than he earned. That's not weakness, that's strength. She nodded, not entirely convinced, and picked up the ring from the porch rail. It was lighter than she remembered, smaller, like everything from that life had shrunk in the distance. She slipped it into her pocket. Ethan appeared in the doorway. Miss Rose? Is that bad man gone? Yes, sweetheart. He's gone. Good. The boy took her hand. Papa says you're fixing his axe tonight. Can I watch? Rose glanced at Silas, surprised. He shrugged. Blade cracked yesterday. Figured you'd know how to fix it by now. A small smile touched her lips. I'll try. The workshop smelled of pine shavings and iron. Rose knelt beside the bench, Silas's axe laid out before her. Blade cracked along the edge, handle worn smooth from years of use. Ethan sat cross-legged nearby, watching with wide eyes. Sam leaned in the doorway, still pale from his fever but upright, stubborn. Silas stood off to the side, arms crossed, silent. Rose picked up the file, tested the weight, then set to work. She'd watched Silas do this a dozen times now, knew the angle, the rhythm, the patience it required. The rasp of metal on metal filled the small space. Sparks flew, brief and bright. Why'd it break? Ethan asked. Got old, Rose said. Everything does. But that doesn't mean it's finished. Just means it needs tending. She worked the crack carefully, filing it down, smoothing the rough edges. Then she heated a thin strip of iron in the forge, hammered it flat, and bound it across the crack like a scar made strong. Silas watched her hands, steady, sure, no hesitation. After 20 minutes, she set the hammer down, wiped her brow, and held the axe up to the lamplight. The blade gleamed. The crack was barely visible now, reinforced and whole. Good as new, she said. Silas took it, tested the balance, ran his thumb along the edge. He nodded once. Better, maybe. Rose smiled. Ethan jumped to his feet, pointing at the window. Look, a bird. They all turned. On the sill, framed by frost, sat a robin, small, bright-eyed, feathers fluffed against the cold. It tilted its head, studying them, then opened its beak and sang, a clear, piercing note that cut through the winter silence like a promise. Rose's breath caught. She remembered the dead robin at Kiernan's threshold, frozen, silent, a bad omen. But this one was alive, alive. Ethan pressed his hands to the glass. Is it magic? Maybe, Rose whispered. The robin sang again, then fluttered to the eaves above the door. It hopped along the beam, pecked at the wood, and began pulling bits of straw and moss from the cracks. Building, nesting. Sam laughed. It's making a home. Silas looked at Rose. She looked back. And something unspoken passed between them. Something that had been building since the night he'd extended his hand in the snow, since she'd sharpened his axe, since she'd chosen to stay when staying was harder than leaving. Ethan tugged on Silas's sleeve. Papa, are you going to marry her? Silence dropped like a stone. Rose's face flushed. She busied herself cleaning the tools, hands suddenly clumsy. Silas crouched beside his son. Why do you ask? Because Sam says if she marries you, she'll stay forever, and I want her to stay forever. Sam's face went red. Ethan, shut up. It's all right, Rose said softly. She set down the file, crossed to the boys, and knelt between them. I'm not going anywhere, married or not. Promise? Ethan whispered. Promise. The robin chirped overhead, hopping along the beam, weaving its nest. Silas stood, moved beside Rose, and offered his hand. She took it. He pulled her to her feet, his grip warm and calloused and sure. Thank you, he said quietly, for fixing it. The axe? Everything. Rose's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, something true and brave and final, but the words wouldn't come. So she just squeezed his hand. The robin sang again. And outside, the first faint scent of thaw crept through the air. Ice melting, earth stirring, winter beginning its slow retreat. Spring was still weeks away, but it was coming. April came cold and bright, the last of winter clinging to the mountains like a grudge. The road to town had thawed enough for wagons, though mud sucked at the wheels and made the horses work. Silas drove. Rose sat beside him, Clara Tate wrapped in blankets behind them, Father Dominic riding alongside on a gray mare. Pete and 6 loggers followed on horseback, silent, grim-faced, axes strapped to their saddles like swords. They crested the hill and the town spread below them. The courthouse sat at the center, built from timber and stone, the territorial flag hanging limp in the still air. And blocking the road, 4 riders waited. Finch's men, foreman at the front, hand resting on his rifle. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop. The horses stamped, uneasy. The foreman spat tobacco into the mud. "Turn around, Cordell. Judge don't need to hear what you got to say." "That's not your call," Silas said. "It is when Mr. Finch says so." Father Dominic rode forward, black coat stark against the pale sky. "Judge Hayes is expecting us." The foreman's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" "Father Dominic Brennan. And Judge Hayes is my brother in Christ. We studied at seminary together, St. Augustine's, class of '54. The foreman's confidence flickered. "Hayes? That's right. So unless you want to explain to the judge why you blocked a priest and a baptized woman from accessing the territorial court, I suggest you step aside." Silence stretched. The foreman glanced back at his men. One of them, a younger man with a scar across his jaw, shifted nervously. "Finch ain't gonna like this," the foreman muttered. "Then Finch can take it up with the judge," Dominic said coolly. The foreman hesitated, then spurred his horse off the road. His men followed. Silas flicked the reins. The wagon rolled forward, mud squelching beneath the wheels. Rose exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Behind them, Pete chuckled. "Nicely done, Father." Dominic didn't smile. "We're not finished yet." They rounded the bend, and the courthouse came into full view. A crowd had gathered on the steps, townspeople, clerks, merchants, women in their Sunday dresses. At the top, near the double doors, stood Magnus Finch. He wore a fine suit, watch chain glinting, hat tilted just so. When he saw the wagon, his smile was thin and cold. Rose's hands clenched in her lap. Silas touched her knee. "Stay close to me." They dismounted. Dominic helped Clara down, her legs shaky after the long ride. Pete and the loggers formed a loose circle around them, not threatening, but present. The crowd parted as they climbed the steps. Finch tipped his hat. "Miss Kiernan, Mr. Cordell, quite the entourage." "We're here for the hearing," Silas said. "So I see." Finch's eyes flicked to Clara, to Dominic, to the loggers. "Bringing an army won't change the law." "We're not here to change it," Rose said, voice steady. "Just to tell the truth." Finch's smile tightened. "The truth is already written, in ink and signatures. But by all means, waste the judge's time." The courthouse doors opened. A clerk appeared, spectacles perched on his nose. "Court is in session. All parties, please enter." Rose's heart hammered. She felt Silas's hand at the small of her back, guiding her forward. They stepped inside. The courtroom smelled of wax and old wood. Rows of benches lined the walls, already filled with curious onlookers. At the front, behind a raised desk, sat Judge Hayes, a man in his 60s, silver-haired, face carved by years of difficult decisions. His eyes found Father Dominic. Something flickered. Recognition. Maybe relief. Dominic inclined his head. Hayes nodded back, then rapped his gavel once. "Order. We'll hear the matter of guardianship. Magnus Finch versus Rose Kiernan. Mr. Finch, present your claim." Finch stepped forward, document in hand. "Your Honor, the matter is straightforward. James Kiernan, legal father and guardian of Rose Kiernan, signed custodial rights to me in December of last year. I have the signed agreement notarized and sealed." He handed the paper to the clerk, who passed it to Hayes. Hayes read it, frowning. "And where's Mr. Kiernan now?" "Unavailable, Your Honor, but his signature is verified." "By whom?" "Clerk Hopper, in Butte." Hayes looked up sharply. "Hopper?" "Yes, Your Honor." Hayes set the paper down. "Proceed." Finch smiled. "Additionally, Miss Kiernan is not yet 18. Under territorial law, she requires a guardian until that date, April 15th, which is today, Your Honor, but as the court session began before noon, legal precedent holds that—" "I'm aware of the law, Mr. Finch." Hayes's tone was dry. "Do you have anything else?" Only that Miss Kiernan has been living unlawfully with Mr. Cordell, a man to whom she is not married, in violation of... Enough. Hayes held up a hand. Mr. Cordell, do you wish to respond? Silas stood. Yes, Your Honor, but I'd like Father Dominic Brennan to speak first. Hayes's eyes softened slightly. Dominic, it's been a long time. Too long, Thomas. Dominic stepped forward, pulled the baptismal record from his coat, and laid it on the desk. This is Rose Kiernan's birth record, from St. Benedict's Parish Archives. It proves James Kiernan is not her biological father. He had no legal right to sign guardianship papers. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Hayes silenced them with his gavel, then picked up the record. His eyes scanned the page. This says, Catherine Brennan, unwed. My sister, Dominic said quietly. Rose is my niece. Kiernan married Catherine to give the child a name, but Rose is not his blood. Therefore, his guardianship claim, and by extension Mr. Finch's, is fraudulent. Finch's face darkened. Your Honor, this is absurd. A priest presents a convenient document. I have a second witness, Dominic said. The midwife who delivered Rose. She kept her own record. Clara stood, trembling, and held out the duplicate parchment. Hayes took it, compared the two documents side by side. The silence stretched. Finally, Hayes looked at Finch. Mr. Finch, do you have any evidence to refute these records? Finch's jaw worked. Your Honor, Rose said. Every head turned. She stepped forward, pulled the bribe note from her pocket, the one they'd found in the church ledger, and placed it on the desk. This is a receipt, $50 paid by Magnus Finch to Clerk Hopper in 1855, to seal my birth record and remove it from public registry. Hayes read it. His face went cold. Mr. Finch, did you bribe a clerk to hide this girl's birth? Finch's hands clenched. That's not... Answer the question. It was a private arrangement. To commit fraud. No, it was... Finch stopped, realizing he'd already lost. Hayes set the note down carefully. This court finds the guardianship agreement null and void. Mr. Finch, you are hereby ordered to cease all claims on Rose Kiernan. Furthermore, you will face charges of fraud and bribery. Bailiff, take him into custody. The bailiff moved forward. Finch stumbled back, face white. You can't... She's free, Hayes said, as she should have been from the start. The gavel fell. The courtroom exploded. Cheers, gasps, arguments breaking out among Finch's supporters and the rest. Rose stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Silas pulled her close. It's over. She nodded, mute, tears streaming. Clara touched her shoulder. Your mama would be so proud. Dominic clasped her hands. You're free, child. Truly free. Rose looked at them. These people who'd fought for her, who'd risked everything, who'd chosen her when no one else would. And then she turned to Silas. I need to say something. He nodded. Rose faced the room, voice shaking but clear. I choose the Sullivan family. Silence fell. Not because the law says I can, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because, her voice broke, because they saw me when I was nothing, when I was sold and branded and forgotten. They saw me, and I choose them. She looked at Silas. I choose you. Silas knelt. The room gasped. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a simple band, silver, worn, engraved with his late wife's initials on the inside. This was Mary's, he said quietly. She'd want you to have it. Not as a replacement, but as... He swallowed. As a promise. That you'll always have a home. Always have us. Rose's hands shook. Silas. Not as debt, not as duty, as covenant. The word hung between them, sacred and binding. Rose sank to her knees, took his face in her hands. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. The courtroom erupted again, this time in cheers. Pete whooped. The loggers stomped their boots. Clara wept openly. Judge Hayes smiled, first time Rose had seen it, and rapped his gavel. Then by the authority vested in me, and with Father Dominic as witness, I declare you intended. Marry them properly, Dominic, before they leave this town. Dominic grinned, gladly. Outside, through the courthouse windows, the sun broke through the clouds, and on the oak tree in the courtyard, a robin landed, small, bright, alive. It sang once, clear and piercing. Rose looked up, saw it through the glass, and felt something break open inside her chest. Not pain, joy. Silas pulled her to her feet, kissed her forehead, and the room erupted again. Finch was led out in irons, head down, shoulders slumped. Rose didn't watch him go. She was too busy looking at her future. By May, the snow was a memory. Rose stood in the garden she'd planted behind the cabin, hands deep in warm soil, the sun gentle on her shoulders. Rows of carrots and beans pushed green toward the light, lettuce unfurled. Peas climbed the stakes Sam had hammered in, crooked but sturdy. The boys raced between the rows, laughing, chasing each other with sticks that were sometimes swords, sometimes axes, sometimes just sticks. Ethan's shouts echoed across the clearing. Sam's deeper voice called warnings about trampling the seedlings. Rose smiled, brushed dirt from her apron, and straightened. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her attention to the road. A sheriff and 2 deputies rode past, heading north. Between them, hands bound, rode Magnus Finch. His fine suit was dusty now, hat missing, face hollow. The trial had been swift. 10 women came forward, records forged, debts fabricated, lives bartered like livestock. The territorial governor himself had ordered the mill shut down, the contracts voided, the ledgers seized as evidence. Finch would spend the next decade in the territorial prison, maybe longer. Rose watched him pass, felt nothing, not pity, not satisfaction, just the quiet knowledge that some debts came due, whether men wanted them to or not. Silas appeared beside her, axe over his shoulder, sawdust in his hair. He followed her gaze, watched Finch disappear around the bend. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes." He studied her. "You sure?" Rose turned to face him fully. "He doesn't own space in my head anymore. That's as free as I'll ever need to be." Silas nodded, set the axe down, and pulled her close. She rested her head against his chest, felt his heartbeat steady as the earth. "Pete brought news from town," Silas said. "Kiernan died last month, boarding house in Butte. Quiet, alone." Rose's throat tightened. She'd known it was coming, had seen it in his eyes that night on the porch, the way a man looks when he's already given up. "I prayed for him," she said softly. "Like I promised. Even after. I don't know if it helped." "It helped you," Silas said. "That's enough." She nodded, let the grief and relief tangle together, then let them go. Ethan ran up, breathless. "Mama, Sam says the beans are ready to pick, but I think he's lying." Rose blinked. "Mama," the words still caught her off guard, still made her chest ache in the best way. "Let's check," she said, taking his hand. They walked to the rows together, Silas following, and Rose knelt in the dirt, showing Ethan how to test the pods, how to know when something was ready to harvest. Behind them, the camp hummed with life, men working timber, saws singing, the mess bell ringing for supper, and above, in the eaves of the cabin, the robin hopped along its nest, feeding 3 tiny open beaks, alive, all of them, alive. Dawn came soft and gold, the sky streaked with pink. Rose woke before the camp stirred, slipped from bed without waking Silas, and dressed quietly. She pulled on her boots, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth and something sweeter, spring maybe, or just the promise of it. She crossed the clearing to the workshop, where Silas's axe leaned against the bench. She'd sharpened it 2 days ago, but ritual didn't care about necessity. It cared about meaning. She lit the lamp, set the whetstone on the bench, and began. The rasp of steel on stone filled the small space, rhythmic, meditative, the sound of care made audible. She didn't hear Silas approach until he spoke. "You're up early." Rose glanced over her shoulder. He stood in the doorway, bare-chested despite the chill, hair mussed, eyes soft with sleep and something warmer. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Bad dreams?" "Good ones, actually. Too good. Woke up afraid they'd disappear." Silas crossed to her, stood close enough that she could feel his warmth. "They're real." "I know, but I needed to." She gestured at the axe. "I needed to do something with my hands, something that mattered." He watched her work for a moment, then knelt beside her. "Teach me." She laughed. "You taught me. Then teach me what you learned." So she did. Positioned his hands, corrected his angle, guided the blade across the stone. Sparks flew, brief and bright, like stars falling upward. Outside, the camp began to wake. Footsteps, voices, the clang of the breakfast bell, but in the workshop, time slowed. When the blade gleamed sharp and perfect, Rose set down the stone and handed the axe to Silas. "Good as new," she said. He took it, tested the balance, ran his thumb along the edge. Then he set it aside and pulled her close. "I love you," he said. Simple, final, true. Rose's breath caught. They'd said it before, whispered it in the dark, murmured it in passing. But this felt different, felt like vows spoken at dawn, witnessed by no one but the pines and the rising sun. "I love you," she whispered back. They stayed there a moment longer, wrapped in each other, the axe gleaming on the bench beside them. Then Pete's voice rang out across the clearing. "Boss, Father Dominic's here!" They pulled apart, laughing. Rose picked up the axe, carried it outside, and there, gathered in a loose circle, stood the loggers. All of them. Pete at the front, grinning. Boyd at the back, hat in hand, something like respect in his eyes. Father Dominic stood beside them, black coat brushing the dew-wet grass, a Bible tucked under his arm. "What's this, whoop boys?" Rose asked. "A proper wedding," Dominic said. "Before witnesses. At dawn, the way it should have been from the start." Rose looked at Silas. He shrugged, smiling. "I might have mentioned we wanted something small." "Small?" Pete laughed. "This is half the camp." Sam and Ethan ran up, dressed in their Sunday clothes, wrinkled but clean. Ethan held a handful of wildflowers, already wilting. "For you, Mama," he said, thrusting them forward. Rose took them, throat tight, and kissed his forehead. Dominic opened the Bible. "Shall we begin?" Rose nodded. She and Silas stood facing each other, hands clasped, the axe leaning against her hip like a promise. Dominic spoke the words, simple, ancient, binding. The loggers listened, heads bowed. The boys fidgeted but stayed quiet. And when it came time for vows, Silas spoke first. "I take you, Rose, not because I saved you, but because you saved me." Rose's eyes filled. "I take you, Silas, not because I needed refuge, but because I found home." Dominic smiled. "Then by the authority vested in me, and witnessed by this community, I pronounce you man and wife." The camp erupted. Cheers, whistles, Pete whooping loud enough to scare the birds from the trees. Silas kissed her, slow and sure, and Rose felt the world tilt into place. When they pulled apart, Ethan pointed at the cabin eaves. "Look!" The robin sat on the edge of its nest, 3 tiny heads poking up behind it. The mother sang once, clear and bright, then dipped back into the nest, feeding her young. Rose watched, tears streaming, and felt the dead robin from Kiernan's threshold finally laid to rest. Life. Not death, spring, not winter, home. Silas took her hand. The loggers crowded close, clapping shoulders, offering congratulations. And as the sun climbed higher, painting the pines gold, Rose Cordell, no longer Kiernan, no longer anyone's property, walked toward her cabin with her husband, her sons, and a future she'd chosen for herself. The axe gleamed in her hand. The robin sang overhead, and somewhere in the distance, winter released its final grip. By May, the snow was a memory, and the camp smelled of fresh pine and turned earth. Rose's garden stretched green along the southern fence. Carrots, beans, lettuce, pushing toward sunlight. The boys raced between rows, laughing, and Silas worked the timberline with an axe whose blade she'd sharpened herself. Father Dominic visited on Sundays, always staying for supper, always leaving with a basket of whatever Rose had baked. Clara Tate came once a week to check on a logger's wife, expecting twins, and every time, she'd sit with Rose on the porch, mending quietly, saying little, understanding much. Finch was tried in June. 10 women came forward. Records forged, debts fabricated, lives traded like cattle. The territorial governor shut down his mill. Kiernan died that winter, alone, in a boarding house in Butte. Rose wept when she heard, not for the man he'd been, but for the father he might have become if shame hadn't eaten him alive. She never went back to the shack. Silas and Pete burned it in April, smoke rising like a prayer. The land went to the church, and Father Dominic built a small school there. Rose taught reading twice a week, her belly swelling with new life by autumn. They never called it rescue. Silas said once late at night that he'd been as lost as she was, just in a different kind of snow, and Rose, watching the boys sleep, the robin nesting in the eaves, the man beside her breathing steady and sure, understood what he meant. Debt had brought them together, but it was choice, hers, his, the community's, that made them family. Spring always comes, if you last through winter. And sometimes, the ones you thought were strangers turn out to be the ones who see you clearest. Home isn't a place you're given, it's a place you choose. And sometimes, if you're blessed, it chooses you back.